Oh, that's quite a few copyright strikes there. And absolutely no one can currently watch this video. Guess I'm gonna have to do quite a bit of editing. If you can tell which bits I've had to edit to get away with copyright, comment down below. You won't get anything, but it might make the video a little bit more entertaining. Right, so football managers do not have the easiest job in the world. Whether you're dealing with billionaires' insane demands, managing the egos of spoiled, overpaid knobheads half your age, or having fat, middle-aged divorcees who got their coaching badges at Wetherspoons tell you don't know what you're doing, it's probably the least appealing job in football. That's why at the Rory Football YouTube channel, we have taken the responsibility to look at the managers deemed clueless failures and give them a fair hearing. Maybe they were geniuses that the players were too stupid to understand their innovative and inventive tactics. Perhaps they were let down by a billionaire owner trying to save a few quid in the transfer market. Perhaps results weren't actually as bad as the impatient fans made out. Or were they actually completely out their depth and fully deserving of their P45? Here we will take a manager that lasted less than 12 months at a club and ask, just what were they cooking? And first up is, after Carlo Ancelotti was dismissed by Chelsea for the indignity of a second-place finish at the end of the 2010-11 season, Chelsea looked to bring in the next big thing in the world of football management. 34-year-old Andre Villas-Boas, an assistant to Jose Mourinho at Chelsea previously, he had just finished an incredible first season at Porto, where he won the Portuguese Cup, Europa League, and most impressively, the Premier Liga, undefeated, helping to develop the careers of players such as João Moutinho, James Rodriguez, Hulk, and Radamel Falcao. AVB had a difficult task ahead of him at Chelsea. While they were double winners the season previously, Chelsea's squad was on the decline. The iconic spine of Cech, Terry, Lampard and Drogba were all approaching their mid-30s, and youngsters such as Josh McEachran, Gael Kakuta, Patrick Van Aanholt and Fabio Borini were yet to realise their potentials. On top of this, owner Roman Abramovich had become obsessed with the style of play of Pep Guardiola's Barcelona, and part of the logic behind appointing VS-Boas was that he could replicate the attractive possession-based style of play at Stamford Bridge. There was another issue Abramovich needed solving. In the January transfer window of the past season, Chelsea broke the British transfer record to sign Fernando Torres from Liverpool for £50 million. Torres had only managed to return one goal in his first 18 games as a Chelsea player, and VS-Boas was expected to get the Spaniard back to his best. This was a very difficult job for VS-Boas. To implement a new style of play was one thing, but to do it with an ageing squad in which the most influential figures in the dressing room were not suited to this style, at the age of 34 with no experience in the league, in hindsight, he seemed destined to fail.
He's an interesting player. I think his curriculum speaks for himself. I mean, he's a player who scores and assists, and he can add to any squad in the world.
There were two priorities in the market for AVB: to bring in some more technical talent and try to invest in the future. Create a contingency plan for when the old guard eventually call it a day. In came teenage defence midfielder Oriol Romeu from Barcelona for £5 million, Belgian prodigy Romelu Lukaku from Anderlecht for £12 million, and Portuguese midfielder Raul Meireles was brought in the final hours of deadline day from Liverpool in a deal worth £12 million. By far the most exciting and the marquee incoming was 23-year-old Spanish attacking midfielder Juan Mata for £23.5 million. Exciting forward Daniel Sturridge had also returned to the club after a very impressive loan spell at Bolton Wanderers. There were also signings not intended for the first team. Mexican attacking midfielder utilised Davia joined from Guadalajara for £1.7 million, while young Belgian goalkeeper Thibaut Courtois joined for £9 million from Genk. The policy of signing young players continued in the January window. Patrick Bamford joined from Nottingham Forest for £1 million, following the signings of Sao Paulo wonder kid Lucas Piazon and Genk's top prospect Kevin De Bruyne. Gary Cahill was also signed from Bolton for £7 million to boost what was proving to be a shaky defence. While we know VS-Boas ultimately failed at Chelsea, you could argue that by looking at his transfers, he had something planned. Courtois, Romeu, De Bruyne and Lukaku were clearly intended to replace the likes of Cech, Essien, Lampard and Drogba, who were all past their best, while the likes of Mata would offer service and creativity to the struggling Torres. Gary Cahill's January arrival would prove to be a reliable if unspectacular foil to the brilliant but equally erratic David Luiz. In terms of outgoings, Yuri Zhirkov was the most significant first teamer to leave in the summer, returning to Russia with Angie Machechkala. Several youth players also departed, including Nemanja Matic, who agreed to join Benfica as part of the David Luiz deal from the previous January.
We saw more of the planned de-aging of the squad in January, as centre-half Alex left to join PSG and Nicolas Anelka went to China with Shanghai Shenhua. Given the success of Juan Mata, who would go on to be one of the best players not only at the club but in the Premier League over the following 2 seasons, Raul Morelos providing solid midfield cover, Gary Cahill going on to captain the club, and the career paths of Courtois, Lukaku and De Bruyne, you have to say that, particularly by Chelsea standards, recruitment in the AVB era was very shrewd, forward-thinking and exciting. So we established that VillasBoas transfers were good for the most part. He strengthened the first team and laid the foundations for the next generation of Chelsea stars. However, ultimately, managers are judged by the results on the pitch, and this is where AVB fell short.
Here's Cavani, check is out of his goal, should be 3-1, is 3-1. Lavezzi, the man on the mark, but Chelsea will look back on some horrible defending.
Things did not start badly. In fact, there were plenty of positive signs. Pre-season form was nearly perfect, with 7 wins out of 7 and only conceding a singular goal, picking up the prestigious Barclays Asia Trophy en route. This continued in the early parts of the season, with both results and performances impressive from August through to the end of October. The Premier League campaign began with a frustrating 0-0 draw at Stoke City. However, Chelsea would go on to win 6 out of their next 7 league games, with 1 defeat coming at Old Trafford against the reigning champions. Despite being 3-0 down at half-time, Chelsea played really well in the second half, and had Torres scored the now infamous miss, it could have easily ended 3-3. VillasBoas was changing Chelsea's style of play to be more attractive and attacking. Daniel Sturridge was growing into a key player, offering a goal threat from the right. Juan Mata, either in the number 10 role or off the left, was the best player at the club. You had Ramirez in midfield, providing energy and bite. Even Torres found a bit of form, following up his goal at Old Trafford with goals against Swansea and a brace against Genk in the Champions League. There was certainly reason to be optimistic as a Chelsea fan at this stage. However, things would soon change, and not for the better. 23rd of October 2011, Chelsea lose 1-0 at Loftus Road to West London neighbours QPR. The game saw Chelsea reduced to 9 men before half-time, with red cards to Jose Bosingwa and Didier Drogba, after Heike Helgeson put the hosts ahead with a penalty after 10 minutes. The aftermath of the game caused further damage to the squad harmony and morale. Captain John Terry was accused of racially abusing QPR centre-back Anton Ferdinand, a saga which would dominate the headlines for months. It would eventually lead to Terry being stripped of his England captaincy, receiving a 4-game ban and being fined £220,000. However, it was the following league game that in hindsight was the defining defeat of the VillasBoas era. Arsenal had not had a good start to the season. The Gunners headed to the bridge without an away win in the league all season, having suffered disappointing defeats at Tottenham and Blackburn, as well as a humiliating 8-2 thrashing at Old Trafford. Despite goals from Frank Lampard and John Terry giving the Blues a 2-1 lead before the break, a chaotic second half led to Arsenal winning out 5-3 winners, with goals from Theo Walcott, Andre Santos and a Robin van Persie hat-trick. The pace of Santos, Gervinho and Walcott exposed VillasBoas' high line that contained the ageing John Terry, Ivanovic and Ashley Cole. These 2 damaging defeats were quickly followed up with back-to-back defeats to Liverpool at the Bridge, one of which jumped Chelsea out of the League Cup in the quarter-finals. Chelsea's progress to the knockout rounds of the Champions League was also under threat, as the poor form continued on the continent, with a draw away at Genk and a defeat in Leverkusen. AVB's management and tactics were being called into question. Chelsea's old guard were in poor form and struggling to adapt to the high defensive line and possession-based approach of VillasBoas. So the Portuguese made the bold decision of trying to phase out the spine that had powered Chelsea's success in the previous 10 years. Frank Lampard was the first casualty, being dropped for key games at home to Manchester City and Valencia, both of which Chelsea won. Lampard, however, did come off the bench to score the winner against City from the penalty spot. The win over the Mancunians was unfortunately as good as it got for VillasBoas at Chelsea. 3 uninspiring 1-1 draws against Wigan, Tottenham and Fulham, followed by a depressingly poor 3-1 defeat at home to Aston Villa on New Year's Eve, left the team outside the top 4 going into the new year for the first time in a decade. The new year did not bring an upturn in performances or results, with February proving a particularly turbulent month. Usually, throwing away a 3-goal lead at home to Manchester United and then following up with a pathetic 2-0 away defeat at Everton would be the worst results in Chelsea's season, let alone month, yet that tie will be reserved for the first leg of the last 16 tie against Napoli. There was no shame in losing to this Napoli side that boasted the likes of Marek Hamšík, Ezekiel Lavezzi and Edinson Cavani in their ranks. However, it was the manner of defeat and the surrounding narrative that really put the writing on the wall. VillasBoas' phasing out of the old guard had continued this game, leaving out the likes of Frank Lampard, Michael Essien and Ashley Cole for the game in Naples, with John Terry also out through injury. Chelsea were utterly dominated in the cacophonous Stadio San Paolo, with the lack of experience and leadership exposed, with Chelsea throwing away a 1-0 lead to lose 3-1. Ironically, it was one of the players who were originally on the bench who saved AVB from further embarrassment, with Ashley Cole blocking Christian Maggio's shot on the line, keeping the score at 3-1, which would prove crucial in Chelsea's progress to the next round. The media storm from this game heaped the pressure on VillasBoas, with reports of him having lost the dressing room and there being a mutiny among the senior players. The final nail in his coffin would come just 10 days later with a 1-0 defeat against West Bromwich Albion. On the 4th of May 2012, just 24 hours after the West Brom defeat, VillasBoas was dismissed as Chelsea manager after a run of just 3 wins in their last 12 games, and reports of senior players being disgruntled about their lack of playing time. AVB would be replaced by assistant manager Roberto Di Matteo on an interim basis until the end of the season. VillasBoas left Chelsea 6th in the table, 5 points behind Tottenham in 4th. They had been knocked out the League Cup, needed to overturn a 3-1 defeat in Naples in the Champions League, and faced a 5th round replay away against Birmingham City in the FA Cup. He finished with a 47% win ratio in 40 games, winning 19, drawing 11 and losing 10.
So when AVB arrived, he was inheriting Carlo Ancelotti's Chelsea side, which generally played in a 4-3-3, but also could go to a 4-4-2 diamond, as you're about to see with this lovely free tactics app I've downloaded. So yeah, bear with. It's worth mentioning now that I actually don't have a clue what I'm talking about. This channel is dedicated to waffle, ramble and conjecture when it comes to tactical analysis. So if I get something wrong, if I use the wrong term, you feel free to leave a comment. I just won't read it because I don't care. Okay, so starting off in goal, you'll have Petr Cech, obviously long-standing Chelsea goalkeeper. We know all about him. Then you have Ivanovic at right back, a sort of centre back playing out position in right back. Very stable, not the best going forward. Basingo would occasionally come in for him as well. David Luiz, of course, came in January 2011. He played centre half with John Terry. Two very, very good ball-playing defenders. Two players who can spray the ball out. David Luiz a bit faster, although a bit more error-prone. John Terry obviously slightly better in a deeper block, but still two excellent defenders on the ball there. And then Ashley Cole out at left back, one of the best left backs of his generation. Not too much to go into when it comes to the back four. In midfield, sort of in the holding role, you would have Mikel, maybe Essien, previously Ballack before he left would sort of play a bit deeper. Then you would have sort of Ramirez. He would sort of, get up and down the pitch all the time, box to box, full of energy, getting, often quite poor challenges in, but also could offer a goal threat as well. Sort of in the other channel, Frank Lampard, know all about him. He would sort of spray balls out to the front three from the midfield, ping them out here. I don't have a football on this app, but just imagine the sort of lines coming off him out wide. Also arriving late in the box to score loads of goals. He scored a lot of goals under Ancelotti, particularly in the first season of the Italians' tenure. Then the front three would be sort of Florian Malouda would sort of play on the right generally, Didier Drogba through the middle and Anelka out on the left. Obviously in January 2011, Chelsea signed Fernando Torres from Liverpool. He was sort of expected to replace Drogba in this 11 because Drogba's contract was coming to the end of his career. Unfortunately, he wasn't that good when he came in, so was often dropped back for Drogba towards the end of the season. As I mentioned, it can go into a 4-4-2 diamond. What would basically happen there is Malouda would sort of come back into a more sort of attacking right-sided midfield player. Ramirez would also play in the channel. And then, obviously, Ramirez also used to be Joe Cole, I guess, before he left, or Ballack even could play that role. Lampard was sort of like a sort of number 10 second striker almost behind Drogba and Anelka up front. Again, of course, you could take Anelka out, put Torres in. Torres and Drogba famously, though, only scored one goal together on the pitch ever, and that was the goal in the Champions League final at the end of the 2011-12 season. Initially, AVB didn't do anything too drastic. He mainly just sort of rejuvenated the front three. Daniel Sturridge came in on the right. as Malouda is about to magically turn into Sturridge, as you're about to see. Sturridge sort of came in on the right. He played really well under AVB, actually scored 10 goals and 5 assists under the Portuguese. Torres had kind of replaced Drogba at this point. He actually was the first choice number 9 under AVB when he came in. He actually started really well at the beginning of the season, got a man of the match against Stoke on the opening day of the season. He scored goals against Man United. He got a couple against Genk in the Champions League and Swansea. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of belief in the club and among supporters and management that Torres would come good and rediscover his Liverpool form. Obviously did not happen. Then on the left-hand side, Juan Mata came in, basically sort of phasing Elka out the side. He was Chelsea's best player that season. He initially did play on the left under AVB. It was more Di Matteo and then Benitez who sort of moved him more in sort of central role behind Torres. On paper, with Daniel Sturridge, sort of he's about 22, 23. Fernando Torres is in his prime, about 25. And then you've got Juan Mata, who's also about 23. That's a really exciting young front three and a total rejuvenation of the previous front three. So I think AVB actually did quite a good job in reinventing Chelsea's attack. The issues came from a conflict between AVB's attractive, progressive style of football and the old guard, Chelsea's former sort of title-winning spine, could not adapt to this new style of play. For a start, AVB liked a really high line in possession and out of possession. So all the players are starting much higher up on the pitch than they would usually. The back four is okay in possession. Cole, Terry, Louise, all very good on the ball. There's not too much issue there, both good short and long range passes. The trouble came there where they lost the ball. David Luiz often would lose the ball. He would sort of carry it out into midfield. He would lose the ball, there'd be a turnover, and John Terry would have all this space behind him to defend, which he basically can't do because he's very, very slow and old. The 5-3 defeat to Arsenal was probably the game that exposed us most. Arsenal had Walcott, Gervinho, Andre Santos, 3 players who weren't anything special, footballing ability-wise, but their speed absolutely terrorised that back four on that day. You can also see Terry unable to catch up with Van Persie after he slips for the fourth or fifth goal, can't remember. But yeah, that was a real exposure of just how incompatible this Chelsea back four was with this high line system, which AVB was trying to implement. Petr Cech actually was another issue. Sweeper keeping was just becoming trendy with Manuel Neuer over at Bayern. Cech wasn't suited to this and was shown up for being a bit old school. He probably wasn't too comfortable receiving the ball outside the box with the ball at his feet. And actually, for the first half of that season, his sort of general just shot-stopping ability really took a dip. There was a lot of goals which Chelsea conceded under AVB that Cech would normally save and actually did save later on in the season as he was one of Chelsea's most important players on winning the Champions League. Midfield was possibly the major issue. VillasBoas wanted a possession-based midfield, and that was just not viable with the personnel we had, which was very, very direct, energetic, athletic players. John Obi Mikel was probably one of the more comfortable with this style of play. His whole game was short passing, receiving the ball under pressure, playing it out. But he wasn't an elite midfielder, despite what Twitter will tell you. There's been a lot of revisionism about John Obi Mikel. He just wasn't as good as he was in the Champions League final every single week. He just wasn't. Ramirez was actually one of Chelsea's best players this season, often occupying this sort of right half space. Got 12 goals and 7 assists as a box-to-box ball-winning midfielder, which is really, really impressive. Issue was, while he was excellent in transition and out possession, as everyone knows who watched Ramirez, he's not the best on the ball. Patient possession football was just not his strength. And actually, the games where he really shone that season were the more transitional ones, where Chelsea needs to hit on the counter-attack, particularly in the Champions League. He was crucial to that run, but under AVB, wanting slow, patient build-up, he's just not that guy, unfortunately. Frank Lampard actually was another problem. His game was basically around receiving the ball, playing long balls, through balls quickly, directly, vacating space in midfield to get on the end of chances, on the edge of the box. We all know what Frank Lampard's game is. And actually, AVB sussed this early. He saw that Lampard wasn't adapted to this style of play and he was one of the first of the old guard to lose his place in the side, which actually caused major dressing room unrest from the reports which have come out since. What is actually very interesting is if you look at AVB's transfer targets, which didn't come through. VS Boas pushed really hard to sign both Luka Modric and João Moutinho that summer, two sort of more technical, press-resistant, comfortable in possession players. I was extremely interested in Radamel Falcao, who had obviously had an amazing season with him at Porto, and then obviously went on to Atletico Madrid to be the best striker in the world, in my opinion, at one point. So anyway, if you look at the team with all of AVB's sort of intended signings, you've now got a midfielder, John Obi Mikel, who's a solid enough holding player, can receive it. Maybe, we had Oriol Romeu coming through the ranks as well. That could have potentially been really interesting. Then you've got Luka Modric and João Moutinho controlling the ball, playing the ball through to a front three of Daniel Sturridge, prime Radamel Falcao, and Juan Mata. I genuinely think you've got something which works there. That is a vision and a team which could have become something quite special and played some really excellent football, especially if maybe John Terry had been phased out as well for a quicker, better centre-half on the ball. Ultimately, I think this job not only came too early for VillasBoas in his managerial career, I also think it came at the wrong time for Chelsea as a club and how they were thinking philosophically. That spine of the team, Cech, Terry, Lampard, Drogba, was just way too influential to overturn in one season, particularly for a young manager who only really had 1 year as a senior coach, albeit a very successful and promising one. I just think the dynamics of the changing room and the club in general was just too difficult for a young, mostly unproven coach, which is a shame really, because again, looking at the players he was targeting and the style of football he wanted to play with the high line and the possession, in hindsight, something could have happened here. High pressing, possession-based football has become a real sort of phenomenon since that season, and with the players he was trying to sign, like Moutinho, Falcao and Modric, there could have been something special here. VillasBoas definitely had some sort of vision. Unfortunately, though, he was not given the time or the resources to fulfill it. The VillasBoas project needed a total squad rebuild and at least maybe 2 seasons for the new players to gel and get used to his style of play. Roman Abramovich Chelsea was never the place for this to happen. It looks, in hindsight, like an appointment from the board who just wanted the new, hot, shiny thing in European football without any idea of how this was actually going to work and benefit the club and players. To conclude, it's hard to say Chelsea were wrong for sacking AVB. His record was poor, he's yet to replicate the success he had at Porto at any other club, and of course Chelsea went on to win both the FA Cup and Champions League within 4 months of him being sacked. However, I do think there was a plan and a philosophy on his part of where he wanted to take this team to go. Unfortunately, I don't think the club was in the position or had the commitment to this project, and therefore we were left with what we got, which in the end was sort of slightly shambolic, not too sure, incomplete team and ideas. So yeah, that's that for the video. I hope you enjoy it. It's a bit different, I guess. This is maybe like a more sort of serious, like football-y video. If you preferred it, let me know. Check out my other stuff, because someone's got to, like, no one's watching it. And yeah, I don't know, I've maybe got some more stuff coming, maybe I haven't, but yeah, in a bit.
We're gonna play football.